Welcome to Partner Path, a podcast that unpacks the venture capital and growth equity ecosystem from a junior perspective. Young entrepreneurs and investors have already had a massive impact on the industry, having started unicorns and launched billion-dollar funds. We discuss these success stories and more by sharing perspectives and advice from some of the industry's most prominent role models. This podcast expresses our views as of the date published and does not represent the views of and is not endorsed by any company for which we work.
Today, we would like to welcome Judy and Eliot Frost, co-founders of Beli based in New York. Welcome, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. We're super excited to be here.
So first, Judy, let's go back to pre-Beli when you were an investment analyst at Mckinsey. Can you talk about your experience at Mckinsey and what drove you to go to business school at HBS?
So I went out of undergrad straight there, and I always thought I'd work in finance, so it was kind of a natural transition for me. And then I went into a 3-year analyst program. So the idea was that I always would go work for 3 years, then go to business school. When I actually got there, they dropped the analyst program and they're like, no one go to business school, like keep working. We actually don't want to do that path anymore. But I was already set on business school and it was very easy for me to do that plan. So there wasn't a lot of thought. It was like after 2 years, I applied and I went. I think for Eliot, it was a bit different. He was there 2 years before I was. So he was there 5 years total and he would have stayed there forever. But when I said I was going to business school, that's actually where we met and started seeing each other. He's like, oh, I'll go with you. And so that's why he jumped on as well.
I love that. And so while at Harvard Business School, that's when you had the idea to start Beli based on a vision where a product knew users' tastes and shared the places that the user would love. I guess, can you walk us through that pain point that you saw in the market and how did you envision a product that could accurately anticipate users' tastes and preferences?
I think it maybe makes sense to go back a little further just because this is pretty obvious, but Judy and I have been pretty restaurant obsessed for a long time before we even started Beli. So for me, I grew up in New York City. Only thing I ever wanted for a birthday was to try a new restaurant. When I was first learning how to code, I actually got my parents kicked off of Yelp for a time because I was very poorly scraping data into a spreadsheet. Judy's family, also very restaurant oriented, a little bit different because her dad's actually an investor, invests primarily in public restaurant chains. So their family would go out to eat 5 nights a week to Applebee's and compare the line sizes and talk about costs. So definitely a little bit different. And then Judy, as she mentioned before, we met working at Mckinsey in New York. And like many people, we really built our relationship around trying new restaurants in the city. And there were kind of two things going on at the time. One was that we had this massive Google map of everywhere that we were eating together. And it was kind of ranked, color-coded, notes, favorite dishes. We think about it a little bit as Beli v0 now. But it was just really clear it wasn't built for the purpose we were using it for. The other thing was that we were feeling way too often or going to places that were supposed to be great. You know, they had really good critic reviews or really high 5-star ratings and just not being that happy with them ourselves. So we kind of had these problems in the back of our minds when we got to business school. And there we really started researching the problem. And the things we found were that, one, pretty much every foodie we spoke to had some kind of restaurant list, whether it was in their notes app or a spreadsheet or a doc or a text thread. It's just clear there wasn't a centralized place where everybody was doing this activity, but everybody was doing it a little bit differently. The other thing was interesting was that pretty much none of these people had ever written an online review in their lives. They were keeping these restaurant lists, but they weren't going on these sites and writing reviews. So what we kind of realized was if we could create a really good place for people to keep these restaurant lists that they already want to keep, that we'd be able to collect a much higher quality and quantity of data than what the review sites are today, and be able to use that to help people in a lot of different ways, to help them find new restaurants, help them find people that they, have similar tastes to, help them figure out what they should be ordering, all these different steps along the journey.
Yeah, especially when you think of a Yelp, because people go to Yelp to post negative reviews. When your chicken comes out cold, that's why people are going to Yelp. And for me, all of my reviews previously were in a huge notes sheet in my phone. So I guess, what is Beli doing? Can you just explain, what is the product? I know that it's an app, so anyone can download it, Android, iOS, from the App Store.
First and foremost, Beli is a place to keep restaurant lists. When you first download the app, we drop you on a page where we say, hey, have you been to any of these spots? Do you want to add them to your list? And it's very much about trying to kind of create your dining history in a very organized way. Over time, once you've kind of done all the backlogging, it becomes more about, hey, I tried a new place. I want to remember that experience. I want to capture my notes. I want to capture my favorite dishes. I want to share that experience with my friends. So it's very much about kind of keeping your own record and organization of restaurants, as well as sharing those experiences with the people around you who you care about.
That's very helpful. And so, as you mentioned earlier, you two, obviously husband and wife and co-founders. So it would be great to just double click on how do you navigate your respective roles and responsibilities at Beli? And then, even combining work and the home life blending together. It's how do you establish those boundaries to really, separate and ensure a healthy work-life balance? And We'll give this one to Judy.
It's not something we do well. I'll start there. But I think when we went into this, we were both super, super passionate about the problem, and that helped a lot. So it's something we both care about. And I think the other thing that's been hugely beneficial is that we can be very honest with each other. A usual co-founder relationship, like you probably have to not be rude or like be careful how you make the other person feel. When it's your husband or your wife, it's very easy. It's just like, oh, don't think that's a good idea. Let's try again. And you kind of cut through all that long discussion. That said, from day one, we kind of put like a list of, I guess, best practices or policies in place to kind of help navigate the balance. One was, so I'm CEO, Eliot CTO, and it was very clear, okay, Judy, you get final say on everything if there's ever a debate, just so we had that organization in place. And then the other thing is we tried to like block date nights once a week and different things like that. So it's like we're not always working. That said, when we're working in restaurants, like a big part of our job is actually going out to eat, to dinner and things like that. So we're always kind of working, but we love it so much that it's not a problem. We have our days, but overall, we think it's a huge benefit.
Yeah, they naturally blend more in a seamless way.
So before we dive into Beli specifically, I'd love to touch on the business model here. I think this is the first conversation Laura and I have had with someone building a social media platform, at least by my definition. Feel free to disagree. And it's a fairly unique business model in that you're focused on engagement on the platform rather than specifically monetization. So talk to us about the pros and cons of building a social media platform from a business model perspective.
It's not to say we don't think of ourselves as social media, but we do ultimately think a lot about, Beli being a tool to help people with restaurant exploration. And I think it works out naturally where, because dining out is inherently social, that part of the utility of the app really comes from it being social. That the fact that your friends are on it, the fact that you're getting recommendations from people you trust, the fact that when you put something out there, you're benefiting from sharing that with your friends. The goal is very much about the finding and capturing great restaurant experiences, but kind of the means to that is through social networks. I think from day one, some of the things that we really saw working well were things like the news feed, seeing that people were browsing that to find new recommendations and bookmarking places from that and commenting on other people's ratings. Seeing that the leaderboard we put in was really powerful because people got really competitive with their friends and wanted to show like, hey, I've been to more places than someone else. People really like not just eating together, but also talking about eating together and all the kind of other things that come in around that.
And you mentioned Yelp. Was there a platform that you looked up to while building Beli?
Because we kind of thought of ourselves, and we'll talk about this later, but we talk about the dining out journey a lot. And it's like all the steps that go into like going out to a restaurant. And we really thought we were starting at the very beginning and very end. Like I hear about a restaurant, I want to remember it, so I bookmark it. And at the very end, I went to a restaurant, I want to share it with my friends and remember it, so I rate it. We kind of thought we were competing with notes apps, Excel, Docs. It wasn't your typical food tools. So when we thought about like what apps or what websites or what tools we should be looking at for inspiration, it was more like Spotify, like creating playlists, all trails, like logging and hiking. So it was not actually in the food space. We definitely looked at all of them. They're very, very important, but we actually really looked more at these other tools than we did at food sites.
And Eliot, just to circle back on engagement specifically, how do you evaluate the traction that Beli sees on a weekly basis? And specifically, how do you assess the quality of users and retention? What metrics do you look at, and how does that provide feedback on what's working operationally?
It's a great question. I think it is so much about finding the metrics that make sense given what kind of business you're running. So for us, because it's so closely tied to how often people are trying new restaurants, and there are some exceptions, but most people aren't trying a new restaurant every single day. So we tend to look at things more on weekly cadences where it's like people try one or a couple new places a week and seeing how many places we can help people at those different points and help them with the different tasks that they're doing on these weekly or several days a week kind of tasks. So we definitely look at that kind of engagement. I mean, other things we spend a lot of time looking at are things like how many restaurants are people ranking? Like what portion of the places they're trying are they actually logging on Beli? Like, are they bookmarking places? Because that tells us, hey, I want to come back and use this to figure out where I'm going to go next. We look at how many friends people have, whether they're sharing the app with other people, because we see how big a part of the experience it is. They have their friends on it, whose opinions they trust so much. So those are some of the things we look at. I mean, you look at a lot of things that are obviously very, I think, typical across consumer products, or not just consumer products, any kind of product, but retention, growth, those sorts of things.
And with that in mind, have there been any product releases that have particularly stood out in that regard?
One thing on top of my mind that we did pretty recently, just this last quarter, was allowing people to keep separate lists for bars, coffee shops, and bakeries. So when we first started Belly, we were 100% restaurant focused. The experience of going to eat mostly sit down, like savory meals. But it was just very clear that the same persona, the same people really like other types of food or other types of experiences, and they wanted to rate them, but it just got really awkward because they were like, oh, how do I rate this coffee shop against a Michelin star restaurant? It just doesn't make sense, right? We found that that's been really, really good for unlocking people exploring these other verticals, but also just reduces the frustration where people are like, I can't really compare these things. Like this list doesn't mean as much to me because I have to do these comparisons that way.
How do you approach acquiring new users? Do you track customer acquisition costs? Do you spend to acquire new users? And how important is the viral component of the app in bringing down that customer acquisition cost?
So we run things a little differently at Belly than a lot of companies do. We actually don't spend on growth. For us, we have two main channels. It's our own social media, like Instagram, TikTok. And there it's Eliot and I talking about our experience eating out. And then at the end, we mention Belly, but it really is just to kind of create a community around dining out. And then if people want to join the app, they go and join it. But then the other channel and the one we focus the most on is like in-app referrals and word of mouth. And it's exactly what you're saying, right? Belly is social, dining out is social. So we want to make Belly the best tool for all things restaurants. And through that, it's like, where can we get you to pull out Belly with other people? And so things like dish racks, things like sending recommendations, sharing your list, we try to make those the best possible product for sharing. And then that leads to growth. So for us, it's like, how many referrals are people sending per user? And then what can we do outside of that to just kind of organically talk about our experience eating that will lead to people getting on the app?
Have you thought about trying to move into spending on customer acquisition down the road?
Because there are network effects, growing just makes the product better. And so with that, right, you want to grow as quickly as possible. So we have tested paid marketing. We spent like a few $100s to see what the cost would look like. And we found that we can get it relatively cheaply. So at some point we might do that, but we like to run things very, very lean and keep our priorities very clear and keeps us very focused. So yeah, eventually we probably will. It probably will be kind of tied to monetization or fundraising and things like that.
That's a good transition. I know that Belly still is in the earlier days, and currently it's free for people to go to the App Store and download and sign up for the platform. So I guess at a high level, I mean, Judy, how have you thought about like monetizing in the future?
So when we think about monetization, I know you guys talked about this a little bit earlier. Being a social media platform, the school of thought is like just grow and eventually you'll monetize. We're somewhat risk averse, so we would love to make money early or at least understand how to make money so that way we know how to grow. But when we think about monetization, it's all tied back to this dining out journey and where does monetization fit in and where does it add value for our users? So we don't think of it as a trade-off. We would never charge for the base product. We think having a lot of people on the product actually is a benefit. It helps all of our users, so we wouldn't want to block people from getting in. But are there places where we can bring in like partnerships with reservation platforms, delivery, things like that, where we could actually make money and our users actually want that? And then are there ways we can actually add additional values to our users that they would be willing to pay for? But for us, it has to be completely aligned. Our users always first and foremost. And if there's something that we think would be helpful to them, we would consider doing it.
I know like Resi, I think in 2019, they launched Resi Fly, which was helping users book flights, hotels. I mean, really casting a wide net. And obviously, they were acquired by American Express in 2019 as well. Have you thought about partnering with the Resis of the world, Open Table, those reservation type apps and desktop platforms?
Definitely. We would love to partner with the different players in the space. We think, I mean, there are great synergies. We know where everyone wants to try, where everyone loves, where everyone would love. And then there's this step for our users where it's like, hey, I know where I want to go. Now I need to make the reservation. And they would love to do it within the app so they don't have to go somewhere else. And so for us, we would love to partner with the different players and actually integrate the reservation times. Today, there are links. So you could click on the Resi link or you could click on the Open Table link, talk, etc. But yeah, long term or even short term, we definitely think that's a possibility.
And a lot of our listeners are from outside of New York. So it would be helpful to tap on. You're in New York right now, a ton of restaurants, very concentrated. Are there plans to expand elsewhere?
The great thing about Belly, and this is kind of the flip side of the coin that we've been talking about. So we talk about it being a social media, but the other side of that is it's a utility. And so we don't have the typical cold start problem that a lot of apps have because it can be a single player game, right? Like I can download Belly, I can rank all my restaurants, and I can do it by myself. And so because of that, we actually see growth all over the country in all major cities. Actually, at this point, a lot of them are growing faster than New York is growing. which is super, super awesome. We definitely think about making official efforts there. We're actually going to Chicago next week to do a little food tour and meet some of our users there. But yeah, it's been easier just given how Beli is structured.
I agree. You also need to go to Philly.
We will. We're dying to.
I'm curious to hear what qualities a city do you look for and when evaluating what city to expand to next? Does there have to be a certain concentration of restaurants within the location?
Because growth starts before we actually even go to a certain city, we look to see how quickly they're growing and how many people are there. And then we, on the back end, try to estimate how many people we think would need to be on the app to hit some sort of critical mass where the network effects kick in. We look at growth would be the number one thing we do. And then we just try to better understand the food scene. So are there a lot of popular restaurants? Like what's the population? And honestly, between those three things, we can pretty quickly tell where we should be going.
One of the really interesting things about Beli is that at its core, it's a data repository. And while you have the consumer experience, you have all this data you're collecting on consumer preferences on restaurants and where to eat and feedback, both positive and negative. And so with that in mind, obviously AI is on a lot of people's minds right now. Do you think that you would be able to use this repository of data to train either a model or some generative AI component? And is that something that's a top mind for you guys if you look to expand that or add that to the product roadmap?
I mean, I think even before kind of the explosion of all these products and algorithms and all this recently, I think it's always been kind of part of our strategy. We feel like the best way to provide really good recommendations is to capture really, really good information about what people like, which is pretty intuitive, but not necessarily the way that it's been done before. So we always, going into it, we said, okay, look, what's the best type of data that we can collect to help generate recommendations? So that's very much how like our rating system came into place, and using the lists and using rankings. So yeah, we 100% plan to kind of go deeper in giving people recommendations based on the data and looking across all of our users to figure out where to go. And the recommendations that we have today are already very powerful, and it's a testament to the quality of the data that we're collecting.
Would love to hear a little bit more about your product team and where you guys are focused on expanding. What features should we expect in the next Beli update?
So we talked a lot about this like dining out journey, and I think our focus on the product is finding other ways to help people along that journey and become a part of their habits related to dining. So the next two big focuses, one would be on discovery. So right now, Beli is not actually that great a tool for like, hey, I want to figure out where to go tonight or this weekend or whatever it may be. It's really more about like keeping these lists and browsing other people's lists. But with that data, we think that we can do a much better job now of allowing people to search for things and browse for specific use cases and use it when they're traveling. So more of the discovery, like, hey, I actually have a reason I want to go somewhere. What's the best place for me to go? That's one of the big focuses in the near future. The other thing we're really thinking a lot about is capturing multiple visits. So right now in Beli, like you rate a restaurant a single time, but people's favorite places are places often that they're going over and over and over again. And we want people to get credit in the game sense, but also just give people a way to capture the way that they interact with restaurants, which isn't always just like, hey, I have to try the new spot. I only go once. So that's another big focus for us.
Yeah, it's similar to like driving loyalty, which I don't know if you guys are familiar with Blackbird, like the loyalty membership platform for the hospitality industry. But I think you really start to pick up just as users want to support and keep these restaurants in business. And a lot of times, as you mentioned, you're going back multiple times in a week or a month. I want to switch over to competition a little bit. So the rise of social media influencers, especially in the food space, has really taken off. I mean, city by city. So I'm curious if you view that as your competition, or maybe it's another social media or restaurant tech platform.
The influencer stuff is really interesting. I mean, obviously, like through doing so much TikTok and Instagram stuff, like in a sense, we're food bloggers, food influencers.
Yeah, you are an influencer. I've
Yeah.
seen your following.
Maybe Judy, not me so much, but we definitely don't see that as competition. I mean, I think we've made a ton of like great friendships through other people, other food bloggers, other food influencers in the city. It's a great community. A lot of them are using the app. It's a really good tool for food bloggers because it's a good way to keep all the restaurants organized and figure out where you should be going next. We don't necessarily see that as not aligned. Judy, anything you want to add on that?
I completely agree. I think actually they're aligned and they're complements. So yeah, I mean, the community is really, really awesome. they're just like really great, hardworking people that have just been a lot of fun to get to know. In terms of like who we think about as competition, I know I touched on this a little bit earlier, but really where we started, it was Excel and Notes and Google Maps. And it maybe sounds like a cop out, but that was really where people were keeping their restaurant list. I think as we think about the future of Beli and focusing more on Explore and things like that, then we move into like competing with Yelp and TripAdvisor and Google reviews. But where we started just wasn't there.
Even your base is a little bit younger too. And so, kind of going on the content point, you've created a lot of content on TikTok and Instagram, and it really seems to have taken off and proven fruitful just in terms of like organic user growth from the app. So, how do you think about like creating that content, and like what have you found through that content creation that's like proven to be the most engaging?
When we think about the content, for us, it was very much like, let's talk about something we're passionate about and then see how people respond. And I think what's been most interesting to see is that like there's just this huge shift as you're talking about younger people getting into restaurants and food. There's this huge shift towards dining out and like as like a really big social activity. And so it used to be somewhat more niche, I think, the list keepers and like we thought we were building this for our generation, but it seems like Gen Z actually has attached stronger to the product, which is awesome. So I think we learned that very quickly that actually TikTok was great. Like we didn't know how we talked to Gen Z, and when people really responded well to our videos, it was like, oh wow, like they actually care about this. So I think that was our first big learning. But I think the other thing we've learned is that people really do like to explore. So we will do these massive series where we go to 65 different burger places in a month, all over the city, all the different boroughs. And we didn't know if we would go to some place that was a little bit of a trek to get to, or no one had heard of before, people would actually respond to that. But people respond very, very well. So I think we were pleasantly surprised by just how interested specifically Gen Z was in that kind of content and actually engaging in kind of the food exploration with us.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you guys envision as the future of Beli. If you think 10 years down the line, what does Beli look like?
We feel as though there's an opportunity to really simplify and centralize a lot of the different aspects of going out to eat. That right now it's a little bit, we think, chaotic, where you kind of check one site and then you check another site and then you text your friends about something and then you like consult this note that you had somewhere and then you have to go to another app and actually book it. And if you want to review it, like maybe you're reviewing it on the app where you booked it, but also there are these other places. We feel it's a little bit all too complicated. So we think that if this is done well, a lot of this stuff can be centralized. And we really think about Beli as being the place where all the opinions that matter to you are in one place. Like it's a place for you to keep your own opinions, a place for you to see your friends' opinions, potentially also following people whose opinions you really trust. And then also this sort of algorithmically generated data. Okay, we've gotten to know you. Like these are the places we really think you're going to love. The extension of that is that it is then the best place for you to execute on these different things, figure out where you want to go, who you want to go with, how you're going to book it, what you're going to order when you're there, and doing that locally, doing that globally. That's a very much kind of a goal of ours.
When we think about Beli long term, we think of it as a tool where you literally could pull it out and it could tell you how to have your perfect day. And it's all the things that Eliot just said, like where you should be going, no matter where you are. You don't need to be familiar with the city. You could be dropped anywhere and you pull it out and it's like, okay, here's where you should be going to eat. Here's who you should be going with. Here's where you should be staying. All the different aspects of your day encompassed in one. We think that there's really no reason, like if we know enough about you and we bring all the opinions that matter to you in one place, that a tool couldn't do that.
It also turns a bit corporate then too, because if you think about the amount consultants travel and even us as investors, I mean, and everyone's like, where should I go? Especially when you're in some of these rogue cities and you know nothing about the restaurant scene. So being able to say, this is a great place for a work dinner for 5+ people. I mean, it seems like the capabilities are quite endless.
No, for sure, right? Like if I know what your tastes are in New York, it actually helps me a lot to let you know, where you should be going if you're out of the country or in a different state or in a different city. And to date, there's been no tool that actually takes what you've done in the past and help you make those decisions in the future. So yeah, for sure, we definitely agree.
I know you guys cover this on your website, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of your favorite experiences. What features or qualities of those experiences have made them stand out, and how have you been able to capture that on the app?
I think what's so cool about food is that this is all going to sound like really cliche and everything, but there's so much variety, in terms of cuisine and price point, neighborhood, even if you're just staying within New York, I mean, there's just an incredible amount of variety. So some of our favorite meals are everything from very cheap hole in the wall spots, takeout spots, to very, very high end, like fine dining. And some people hate trying to compare those things, but we kind of enjoy it. Just what excites you, what was really unique about it. And it's nice to be able to go back and have these memories. Like, who did you go with? What did you like about it? I think for us, it is the variety and trying to think about like, hey, in every place we post about, we try to figure out like, what is this place the best at? Like, what is this the best in the city for? And it's like, this is the best, this type of food in this borough. Best is obviously super subjective, but like, what was our favorite? Like, what did we really enjoy? I think it's kind of trying to see the best in it, in something, and figure out why it stands out.
Well, before we end, you have to give us a few names. Can you name drop a few of your favorite either food groups or restaurants?
So, I mean, we're huge fans of like Four Charles and the Hog Salt group. So we love the Four Charles, Au Cheval, Monkey Bar, those spots. We love Unapologetic Foods, which is Sema, the Maca, Ada, Masala Wala and Sons. Like those Indian places are awesome. We big fan of Missy Robbins. We love Missy and Lilia, Rita Sodi. So we love Isodi and Via Carota as well. Those are a few of our.
And I'm curious to hear, have you guys looked to expand the features of Beli to provide something that's facing a restaurant or a chef and enable them to learn from the feedback of their customers?
So at the moment, it's definitely not set up the way that some platforms are as sort of a way to interact with restaurants, where like the restaurant, owns their page and is able to see all the ratings and kind of respond to them that way. It's definitely an important goal of ours with Beli to make this something that is better for consumers, but also, a fairer platform for restaurants. We think that right now with this sort of one size fits all rating that a lot of sites do, restaurants are kind of punished a lot for people going who weren't necessarily likely to like it. Like they're not the kind of person that would want to go to that restaurant, spicy food restaurant. They don't like spicy food. And that's not necessarily the most relevant thing, say. So we're always thinking about how can we create something that's beneficial to the restaurants, making sure the right people are going to those restaurants, the ones that are likely to like it. And then I think long-term, what are things that we can provide the restaurants that are helpful to them and help them learn and how to serve their customers better. That's definitely something we also think about in terms of monetization and in the future.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is whenever you're providing recommendations, trust is really, really, really important. And we think given that we're so early, some platforms, have sponsored posts and things like that. And then you go in there and you don't know if like the restaurant paid for it and that's why it's at the top of the list, or, if it's actually a good spot. So we are very hands off with the restaurants today. Even with our social media, we don't do the comp meals in exchange for reviews. And it's just to build like something that we feel other people can trust. So that's why we're very hands off today.
To end every episode, we like to ask 2 questions. And we'll ask the first one to Judy. What motivates you to work hard?
That's a great question. I think there are kind of 3 things that motivate me. First, it's how passionate Eliot and I are about this problem. Like we actually love dining out in restaurants. It's something we've cared about, as Eliot said, for our whole lives. And so it's been a really cool problem to tackle. The second is our team. Our team cares as much about this problem, if not more. And so they really push us. And so we try to be the best versions of ourselves for them. And I think third and most important is our users. I don't think I ever would have thought that starting some sort of social media consumer app that our users would reach out to us. I kind of thought we'd be the people behind the door that you would never see. But our users are awesome and they reach out to us constantly all day, every day, telling us what they want in the app, giving us feedback, just giving us support. And that's been really, really cool. And they definitely are probably the biggest motivator for us.
Yeah, it's probably good to have too much feedback because then you get to pick and choose and really put the high quality features in. And so, Eliot, for you, what's one piece of advice you would give your younger self?
Not stress too much about, I think, those first decisions in your career. What I've seen is careers are pretty long. So I think even if the first thing you do isn't exactly the thing that you're interested in, I think if you kind of get the most out of that experience and think about what are the things you want to do better or try next time, that you will have a lot of opportunities. It's really hard early in your career to know exactly what you want to do. I definitely did not anticipate being an entrepreneur. Then here we are.
Judy, Eliot, thank you both for coming on and sharing your experience founding Beli. If you are listening to this podcast, feel free to check Beli out. It's a phenomenal app, and Laura and I are both daily users.
Thank you so much for having us. We had a ton of fun.
Yeah, thank you so much.